It is possible to mean well and still do harm. We've all trodden on someone else's toes before. It is possible to preach Jesus and still replicate injustice. It is possible to be Spirit-filled and still need to be corrected. The apostles weren't evil for their oversight. And the Greek-speaking widows weren't troublesome for speaking up. We've got to break out of these false binaries where one side has to be right and the other side has to be wrong. What makes the early church faithful isn't that they got it perfect, it's that they listened. The 12 called a meeting of all the disciples. They didn't ignore the complaint. They didn't gaslight. They didn't say, let's just pray about it. But look at all the good we're doing. They didn't center their own feelings. They didn't shut down the conversation. They listened. Because in the words of Scott Cormode, professor of leadership development at Fuller Seminary, leadership begins with listening to the longings and losses of those entrusted to your care. Leadership begins with listening to the longings and losses of those entrusted to your care. So the apostles gathered the whole community. And they didn't just patch the problem, they shared power. They said, choose 7 well-respected men from among you, leaders from the affected community. Now, as Pastor Rich noted last fall when he preached on this, yes, they were all men, because unfortunately some cultural shifts take longer to address. But every name listed in the 5 was Greek. Stephen, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicolaus. The community didn't just add a token voice. They trusted the marginalized community to lead the response, to lead the repair. This is what justice looks like. This is what shalom looks like. Not performance, not appeasement, but the redistribution of leadership, the acknowledgement of harm, the redirection of power for the good of the whole. And I think, though it doesn't explicitly say so in the text, God was present both in the complaint being brought and in the way it was addressed. Both were needed. Both were holy. And let's note that these weren't just organizational decisions. They weren't just logistical decisions. They were spiritual ones. The leaders were chosen because they were well respected, it says, and endowed by the Spirit with exceptional wisdom. Qualifications weren't charisma or credentials. They weren't who was the most connected or even who had the most experience. The qualifications were spiritual maturity and community trust. Because making sure people are fed, seen, and cared for is as much a spiritual act as preaching from a pulpit or leading communal worship or praying a powerful prayer. So Christ City, our work of relational caring, the cultivating of healthy relationships, whether in your life or in our shared life together, it isn't simply about self-improvement. It's sacred work. And the result in Acts 6, verse 7, God's word continued to grow. The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased significantly. Even a large group of priests embraced the faith. When the church confronted its internal bias, its external witness expanded. When the marginalized were elevated, the gospel advanced. When justice was practiced inside the church, grace overflowed outside.